Okay,
Okay,
cool.
let's do
Where do you
this.
want to start?
I want to start at the beginning. What is your perspective? Because I know that in Enspiral, everybody brings a completely different perspective of what is happening. But what is your perspective on the source, on the origin story of Enspiral Europe? How did it begin?
Well, I guess that there was a point like a few years ago when Rich and I we started to travel to Europe more often because we had more work here. So we spent, I think, 3 years where we will be here for like 5 to 6 months, maybe a bit more each year, and then we'll go back to New Zealand and so on. And after a while, we decided to move to Europe. And when we moved here, we started to connect more with the folks that were already here from Enspiral. And I was like, wait a minute, why are we trying to connect with New Zealand and Spiral that is, so time zone difference is so big and it's always difficult to try to join calls and things like that. And we were talking to Phoebe Tickle, that she was part of Enspiral at that time, and she was quite involved and has always been in London. And she was always thinking about what would it look like to have more Enspiral in Europe. So I feel like the original source of Enspiral Europe was Phoebe. And it's funny because she's not part of Enspiral anymore. And now is when Enspiral Europe is happening, right? But at least she was more the one talking about Enspiral, creating a little bit of a buzz about Enspiral over here. And any of us that will travel will talk about it and so on. So then when we moved to Europe, finally, we started to talk to Phoebe and Joriam, that he was already here, and at that time he was a catalyst. And we started to talk about, well, what would it look like? Could we have some meetups? Can we have some, something happening here that it will be an Enspiral like? So we started to plan the first Europe gathering, and we were going to do a gathering, and anyone from around the world that was part of Enspiral could join. And then I think like maybe a few months before the gathering was going to happen, it was when COVID hit Europe and we all went into lockdown. I was like, okay, I don't think the gathering is going to happen, but what else could happen, right? Like now we were a bit enthusiastic. We were calling that working group the Seed working group. That was the Enspiral Europe Seed working group. And the idea that we had was, well, let's experiment with having something slightly different in Europe. Can we just gather the people that are already in Europe and anyone else that might want to be joining from Europe? And let's test what will it look like to have slightly different experiments in terms of governance. So how can we do our gatherings, and how can we do the pods, and how can people join Enspiral Europe, and things like that? What would it look like? And envisioning into a future of, if this experiment goes well, maybe we'll want to turn it into more of a permanent structure, more of a thing that we still didn't even know what it would look like, right? So I think during pandemic, what ended up happening is we did one gathering online with everyone that was already in Europe, part of Enspiral. And after that gathering, we formed some pods just to keep the connection going. And also there was that time, right, where it was locked down, everyone was completely online, especially the first year was, well, you know what it was, everyone knows what it was. It was confusing and overwhelming and tiring and exhausting, and people lacked connection. So I think the pods at that time worked really well because we just wanted to stay connected and they really helped to build the sense of, we are actually a group. It's not just this thing that is happening over there that we just chit chat on a Slack channel with people that we never met. There was a sense of coming together. I think at the same time, there was a connection working group, and you'll tell me better about this, that started having the regular calls every 2 weeks, right? It was more or less after that first gathering that we did, the online. And I think like it kind of, from there onwards, we were slightly experimenting with different things. But at the same time, that sense of maybe this will be more of a slightly separate group than the rest, and we could form something, right? We already were calling ourselves Enspiral Europe as a differentiator from the rest. We had our own channels, we had our own Lumio, just doing things a bit different. But I feel like because of the pandemic, we had to really it was a very, very slow start until we managed to have that first in-person gathering in Bergerac in summer, where some of us came together. And that coming together, I think that's where I will say, that's where it really felt like we were Enspiral Europe. Right.
That makes sense. So it seems like it's this formula that's really in the DNA of Enspiral, not to base it around this in-person gatherings. And I find it interesting to hear from you that it, like, we already been calling ourselves Enspiral Europe. We had our own Lumio. It was kind of all working. We had the connection working group. We had pods, but actually only when we came together for a physical gathering, not even the digital one, like that was the first European gathering. That's when it felt like, okay, now we're in Enspiral.
Yeah, at least that's what it felt to me, right? Again,
yeah,
here we go.
Of course, your perspective.
I don't know, ask the others, we'll see. Maybe the others are like, no, and that's fine. But yeah, like that's to me when it felt like, okay, we're doing a thing. This is a thing. It's not just an online space. So, and it was funny. Like I feel like this particular group, it's quite different vibe than other Enspiral groups that I've seen. Even like the Enspiral gatherings in New Zealand and the Enspiral groups that people that mainly work together or connect more over there. It has like a different feeling to it. It feels
Can you talk more about this? I'm very curious to hear, like, what are the differences of our context and why? What is different about Enspiral Europe?
I feel like people here, like this slow start that we had, it was more about being than doing. And maybe it will change, right? Maybe as soon as we are changing as well, and you know, the pandemic is kind of easing, let's hope, and we're getting more in person and people are less overwhelmed by the world and being online. Well, hopefully. Again, we'll see. But it feels like that all these years, and I think it's been like 2-3 years now of being in Enspiral Europe and creating this thing, it felt like we were mainly on the being space. The whole thing was coming together in the gatherings. The past few gatherings felt that way. Coming together was enough. Being together in the same space and having interesting conversations and just connecting with each other. And, you know, there's a lot of people doing a lot of personal transformational work. There's a lot of people thinking about like you, right? Like being based in local communities and what does that mean and what does that look like? I guess there's people that are in different stages of life as well, and that makes a difference. But in New Zealand, Enspiral, at least at the beginning, I think it's also changing now, but I haven't been there. I haven't been connecting much, so I don't know. But at least before, it felt to me it was very on the doing. There was a lot of, okay, what are we doing and how are we going to do that? And everyone was in projects and super busy and trying to reinvent Enspiral all the time. And I think that has slowed down in general. But I feel like here it hasn't even started. Like it's always been super like, yeah, we just, you know, it's okay. We're just connecting. That's fine. There was some impulses at the beginning. There were a few people that were more eager for the doing and they didn't stay. I feel like the group was creating a different energy and that it wasn't for them. But yeah, that's kind of the difference.
I remember
Although, I must say, yeah, go for it.
When I was scanning through our Lumio and just kind of looking for, you know, like what were the milestones and what were kind of the most significant parts of our timeline as Enspiral Europe, I came across like this, I think 1 or 2 posts at different points where there's like this really somebody puts an energy like, yeah, let's do projects. I want to see what people are doing. Let's see how we can converge and do something together. And the response was pretty much minimal. Like people at best would share what they're doing, but there was never really this like, oh yeah, let's do things together. And I feel that the same. Like we were just kind of meeting every 2 weeks, and then there were pods for people that participated in pods, and the gatherings. Well, I've been just to the first digital one and then the last one in person. But yeah, it also felt like super chilled, just like hanging out, maybe like one loose governance conversation here because now we're a node, so we need to figure it out. But
yeah, it's been interesting to see it actually. And I do think that the fact that we were through these pandemic years really made a difference on that. That's my hypothesis, that maybe if we had met in person from the start and if we hadn't had all this time, a lot of people have been naming burnout, right? That's a thing that is happening everywhere. And I do feel like it's connected with the pandemic and it's connected to the online, so much time in the online spaces. So maybe it would have been different, but we'll never know, right? So this is what we got. It's interesting though that it does feel like on the last gathering, in the summer one in Portugal, the governance conversations really had momentum. Like a lot of people were interested in those. We had 2 previous in-person gatherings and the virtual one. And every time we tried to have like a big governance conversation with everyone, there wasn't just much interest at all. The conversations will go somewhere else, or people will be doing other things. And this time was like, okay, maybe we're getting ready for the doing part, or maybe we're getting ready to feel like, oh, we are actually a thing, we are actually a node, and that has implications. And how do we do this? And how do we want to be a node? So yeah, some changes.
Do you have any hints to pinpoint like this? Almost, it seems to me like it's some kind of maturity point. Like, we're hanging out, and at some point it's like, oh no, wait, we are a thing, so maybe we need to figure out all the things, like the kind of administrative, how do we actually work, what are we, how does that work, like what is this point, like I guess the rite of passage is just kind of getting to know each other, spending time, but is there like a moment that you can pinpoint more or less that this is when this maturity happened, or maybe it was a period, I don't know, but just I'm curious about how to identify this moment, like your group is now mature. You can proceed to the next stage.
Yeah, like the group forming stages, like forming, norming, storming, la la la. I can't really pinpoint something specific. I think like for me it was that gathering and seeing people interested in governance. Potentially the fact that by then we were on the edge of already being a node, and nodes being a thing in Enspiral, that made it maybe more real, more having like a formalized structure that we could fit in. And there were implications to that, implications in terms of what do we do with the money? How do we pay for it? Like things like that. Maybe that had something to do with it. But I feel like a big part is just people getting to know each other and having the sense of, these are my people. I belong in this group. This is the people that I hang out with twice a year at least, right? And then we meet online, and we meet in person, and we meet online, and we know each other's stories, and we help each other with things. It's just that sense of community that is building on people. Where maybe before it was like, oh yeah, it's kind of like a network, it's this distant thing, and now it's more concrete and more real. That's the only thing I can kind of think about.
Yeah, I think that this makes sense now, and it brings me back to always thinking people before projects, right? Like it's kind of exactly what we did. We even tried to do projects, it just didn't work. Like, no, you do people now. Focus on just chilling, being together, getting to know each other. But one question that is coming up for me, just due to our context that we're kind of spread across this continent with many countries, and it's maybe slightly, I mean, Europe is not so gigantic, but it still might be a bit trickier sometimes to actually meet in person. So I'm curious, how could this people part happen, and how we can actually cultivate this belonging when we know that maybe not always we can gather everyone in real life. And I mean, I see that, for example, for me, like I had a very my journey with Enspiral really changed after the in-person gathering. I mean, I was at the digital one, and it was my kind of first experience of Enspiral, and I was like, okay, cool, this is a cool network of people. I like that. Let's see what it's gonna bring. And I guess also, stepping from outside of Enspiral into it, I had this like really glorified vision. I guess this is quite common, like, see, wow, this majestic thing, and then you come inside and you're like, oh yeah, it's nice people doing things together. So, but yeah, I was there, and I could see that for this 2 years that I was in between, like, I haven't really met anyone in person. I was kind of connected, but I really didn't feel so maybe belonging there. I mean, I was still involved in working groups, so I did more maybe that a person just stepping in would do. I'm not sure, but I did research. I was reading through handbooks, all of that stuff. But really, the gathering changed everything for me. Like it almost felt like I didn't get it until I was there. So yeah, I'm just curious because I know not everyone, I think, from our even kind of Enspiral Europe group actually participated in a physical in-person gathering so far. So I'm curious if this is a challenge that just is part of our context, or it's just something that eventually might lead for people to just phasing out. Like if they cannot meet in person, then probably they might lose interest. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's both a challenge and an opportunity, because I see it as, it seems like we really thrive as a community here in the in-person spaces and not so much in the online ones, right? Like the connection calls that still happen every 2 weeks, and there's not many people that show up. People are a bit maybe fed up with the online spaces as well. At least I am. I know of that. And based on work, it's like, okay, if I have to be online for work, I want to do all my other things not online anymore. And so there's a part of it. But I think like the opportunity is that we maybe don't have to wait to have a gathering every 6 months. We can have more gatherings more often. And it could be smaller, or it could be, hey, I'm going to be in the Netherlands. Who's going to be around? Can we have like a weekend together? And who else wants to join? Right. So it could be more informal spaces in a way. There will still be a gathering. There will still be Enspiral. There will still be the vibe. But they can also create more spaces for more local communities to thrive as well. I see like Netherlands and Belgium that, they're super close, and there's quite a lot of people there now, and there's going to be more. So the next gathering is going to be in Belgium, part because of that, because there's more people there. So it makes sense to create a space that is easier for people to come. Not everyone needs to be flying. It's easier for arrivals, also for people from Germany and so on. But there could also be another one happening in Portugal, right? There could be more of a small communities that are gathering there, and there's some gatherings that happen there, and whomever can arrive will do that. And there might be maybe more people from Spain, or maybe people from France, people that go there often. So I see it more like that. We actually talked to Viola a while back, and I was like, hey, maybe we can have one of the gatherings in the north of Italy. And that could be a space as well to generate a bit of something different. So yeah.
So fascinating. So it's almost like there's this European node, but just because of how Europe is, it might kind of turn into this little dynamically changing sub nodes that are kind of just popping up here and there.
Yeah. So if we see it from the from the micro solidarity language lens, maybe Europe node will be the congregation, but there might be a lot of different crews that are happening, and we all get together sometimes. And ideally in summer, we can have like a big gathering where everyone can come together, and then through the year we might have smaller meetups in different spaces. Because one of the things that we're thinking as well is, because we haven't had so many in-person events and people are a bit reluctant to the digital, the growth of Enspiral Europe has been very slow. It's like a trickle of, one person joined here, and another person joined there. And the idea that we had was, well, we'll invite whomever we want to invite to Enspiral, we'll invite them to an in-person gathering. And after that, we'll check with the community. If there's no red flags or anything like that, and that person wants to join, then that's it. Because that's the space where they can meet people, they can get the Enspiral vibe and so on. And after the gathering, they can be in pods, so the connection starts. So if we have more events happening around, then there's more chances for people to join as well. And then it could grow a little bit faster. Not that it needs to, right? Grow at the speed of trust is still my favorite, but that at least there is that opportunity.
I see. So it's, I understand now how you reframe this challenge into an opportunity. Like actually the fact that we're so distributed geographically allows us perhaps to create more of this in-person events in different regions that then would have different crews popping up all around, and then those people coming together for this kind of congregation size big gathering once a year or whatever, however often we want to do that. It's fascinating. And I see, like, it's a very different context from New Zealand, I imagine, where you have this kind of base in Wellington and I guess people just kind of concentrate around that space.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot more localized. And even like the people that are in Australia, they'll still will fly to Wellington because it's like a 4-hour flight and you're there, right? It's like for us to meet, right?
Yeah.
I'll fly from Italy to Lisbon. 3 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
So I see it in that way. And we'll see, right? Maybe in the future what will end up happening is that we'll have many more nodes. And it's not just one Enspiral Europe node, but there's a Belgium node and a Portugal node and a Germany node or whatever. Will still be Enspiral. I think maybe for me, the main challenge is how to maintain the cross-node relationships. And that's something that we are still to explore, right? How do we maintain the fact that we are all Enspiral? And I think here is where we have something to learn from WeShare. Well, we have lots to learn from there anyway, but they used to have this kind of format where they have different regions will have their own thing, and it didn't work for them. So I think this is a conversation to have with Francesca. Maybe if you're documenting these things, could be a good space as well. Check with her and see what she's seeing and what she knows from WeShare and what happened there and what are things to kind of like, what are the pitfalls that we can just pay attention to.
Wow, that's a great suggestion. I love that. And I think it's going to be my added question to this kind of whole set. Like, who's the next person to talk about something that is specific for us? But I see what you mean. And I guess, you know, what I found fascinating when I started my research is that in the very, very first post about Enspiral Europe, like saying basically, hey, Enspiral, we are doing this experiment in Europe and it's going to be kind of this. It already more or less states what happened. So like, you know, there was this idea how we're going to experiment with a governance and potentially we see some kind of a node. I mean, it was a different vocabulary, but basically it was that, like, and it did indeed happen. But since Europe is the first one to be developed in Enspiral, I guess we have this challenge that there is no playbook. We're creating it as we go. So like maintaining things like, okay, first is how do we actually start a node? So like we are kind of figuring it out and now we can document it and share it with other nodes. But then yes, there's this other challenge. Okay, so we have a node now, but what does it mean for our relationship with Enspiral Global and other nodes as well, and how we can flow between all of them? And it's a lot to explore, I guess, for us.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, on one hand, yes, we're doing this anew as Enspiral, but this is what I'm saying. There are other communities out there that they have already experienced with this, and what are the spaces where we can learn from each other too? Because we don't have to reinvent the wheel either. And of course, different communities will have different challenges because they have different people and different values and different ways of doing things. But I think it will still be interesting to hear from others too.
That makes a lot of sense. And also it's kind of, it even is easier because those people like Fran is also member of Enspiral, right? So it's
of course
this interweaving of communities. I love that. Like, oh, this person is actually in those 3 communities and everything connects at the end anyway.
I mean, she's definitely a pollinator, right? She's a bridge builder. So it'll be interesting. I think like I had some light conversations with her about that. Esra was also part of WeShare, and she was recently hosting some conversations for them around this membership and around what does it mean and things like that. I haven't heard lots of details, but yeah, I think Fran's probably the main source.
So I have one question, kind of taking us a little bit back. I mean, we covered a little bit that, but I'm really curious. You mentioned in this very beginning, in the origin story, one of the kind of drivers of creating Enspiral Europe. I mean, one was just that there is actually an amount of people, like enough of people geographically based in Europe to actually move this energy forward. But you also mentioned that we want to do some kind of experiments with governance and just do things slightly differently. Could you name a couple of things that, like, in this early stages, and that was your vision, like, okay, we are Enspiral Europe, these things we want to experiment slightly different?
Yeah. I think like there's punch on that initial thread that we already put out in terms of what are the things that we wanted to, like, that we named to the community that we're going to try something different. I think one of the things was, what would it look like if we are more in-person gathering based, that online chat based? And it kind of happened that way, right? Like, I think it's also the people and the moment, but whatever. But this thing about, well, what will it look like if we invite people to a gathering, and after the gathering we invite them to the network? Like looking into how we bring people in. That was one of the main pieces, because it also, what was happening is that at that time there wasn't a lot of the Enspiral members that were the only ones that could invite people that were based in Europe. There were a few of us, but only like 3 or 4 of us that were actually involved with this Enspiral Europe idea. So we were like, well, if we want to create a sense of group here that is slightly differentiated from the others, we're gonna have to invite people. And how do we do that if we only have 3 of us, right? Or 2 of us, or whomever. So that was one of the experiments. Yeah, I think the main one was, we were going to try with being in person and having gatherings as the main point of connection. And we were going to try inviting people to gatherings and to the network after that, and inviting people through like an onboarding pod. So having a pod after the gathering that holds the newcomers, and that pod is held by some of the older people in the network, so they have the context and they can support them. And that's still an experiment that we're trying, because we haven't yet managed to do much of it. We only did one, but I'm going to be holding the next one. So, and after the next gathering, I'm assuming will be more. So, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I was in the prototype onboarding pod
in one of them,
with
yeah.
Sylvia. It was 2 of us, and yeah. It was really cool experience. I really appreciated it. So I'm also happy to see that this idea of pods is also evolving into this purpose, right? Because it's more direct towards onboarding, and I guess this is also part of your work now you evolved from this seed working group all the way to people working group, right? So bringing new people into the Enspiral.
So with that's interesting to name as well. So the working group, when we started with Phoebe and Joriam and Rich and me, we were the seed working group. And then after, I can't remember if it was after the first in-person gathering or if it was after the first digital one, but we created the Sprout working group, right?
Yeah, it was like, after the digital one, I think, because I remember being there. Yeah,
you have the timeline. Yeah. And we had the Sprout working group that it was like, okay, now we are actually a thing. And it was Rich, me, Uli, and Vika. And we had that group going for a bit. Then Vika had to drop out because she was very busy, but we stayed with Uli for a while. And then after one of the other gatherings, there was that other split between the connection working group and the governance working group, right? So we started to already see where were the needs. And now we have the people working group that is me, Brigitte, and Corina. And what we're looking at is pods and welcoming newcomers, basically invitation. What does it look like? Yeah.
And the connection working group is still ongoing. So it seems
like the connection is ongoing,
And that it really feels to me that we had this bi-weekly call pretty much all the way since from the digital gathering. So our first Enspiral Europe gathering back in 2020. So every 2 weeks, apart from, you know, breaks for summer and Christmas, there is this connection call, and maybe not many people are coming, but still people are coming. It's fascinating. I mean, this was always a challenge in the connection working group, like how to actually bring more people to the space, how to get more people to host the calls, all of that stuff. But hey, that's a different story. And I guess part of the challenge is also what you're naming, that in generally speaking, people are overwhelmed with the amount of digital work, and it's just so much fun to be in person. So once we actually have those in-person spaces, then maybe there's not so much interest anymore in the digital connection call, because you are connected anyway, even if you show up every 6 months to a gathering.
Totally. And I do wonder as well with that, like what are, you know, what are we learning about those connection calls? What is useful and what might need to be rethink? And what are some different experiments we can try there, right? I think the good thing of the node is that we have a field of experimentation. What are different things we can try? Of course, we have the base from Enspiral, and we have what we already learned there, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But what else can we try? What are things that we can test here that might be different than there?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because I feel like different nodes will have different flavors. No matter, you know, like just because we're in different parts of the world, because we have different people, whatever it is.
So maybe actually this is a perfect segue to kind of the last question that I have for you, which is this kind of synthesis question, you know. So I know that every node will have a completely different context, and I realized that even when I was reaching to the Web3 node, like it's just such a completely different concept that not everything, you know, you can just copy paste. But I imagine there is some kind of either process or some insights. I mean, even for you, Nati, like if you would now, for whatever reason, want to start a new node, given all of these things that you have learned, like what would be the, maybe not the process, I mean, unless you can synthesize one, but what would be the things you would be paying attention to particularly, or what are the kind of pro tips as a node starter?
Yeah, I think like I'll pay attention. Basically, I think what we're doing so far, it seems right. So pay attention to who's already there and start connecting and building that sense of being a group with who's already there. Not trying to grow immediately, but trying to solidify that, we are a thing, right? Like that we started to notice now. And then having person events where you can start inviting a few people. Maybe what is interesting to note is what we've been doing. That is, we normally have like a 60%, 60 or 70% already Enspiral people, and we only open to 30 or 40% newcomers. So the ratio of who are we inviting in, I think it's important in terms of maintaining the sense of that group that is already existing and building a little bit coming in, and you get the vibe, right? And once you got the vibe, then we can invite more. Like it makes sense to me. And then having pods after that, and figuring out like working groups, not from the start, like, but what is actually needed. And based on that, have working groups that are with people that are interested to take different parts of the system to hold it.
This feels like a very important insight to name, just because yesterday I had a call in another group where I'm working, and we kind of exactly faced this problem that by default, it's like this new thing that is forming. So people go into this mode of like, oh, we need to set up all the things. But actually, this is not at all what we need. We're still in the seed phase. So why would we putting the structure for the flower to appear? Like we're not yet on the sprout stage. So just kind of tackle the immediate needs and experiment freely, just to figure out what actually wants to emerge from the group and from the people who are already putting the energy there.
Totally. I think that makes more sense to me in general, right? Like when we work with groups, that's what it says, like, just don't put too much, just put what is needed. Like, what's the scaffold that you need when you start building. That's all you need. Like, and as
Perfect.
you need it more, then you'll build the rest.
That's a very reassuring thought, I think, to leave us for the end of this conversation. Like, it's okay, you can chill. No need to build everything at once. Just like slowly.
Yeah, and we see it now, right? Like, we had some conversations. I think even in that initial thread, we put something about maybe in the future the funds will go somewhere else, and that is happening now. What is it? 3 years later.
Yeah,
right.
Took
So
time.
it's like now it's like okay, yeah, we're using Open Collective and we have our own Open Collective and we run the events through there, right? Like all the gatherings are run through Open Collective. So it's like great, easy. So it's just happening now. Yeah.
Growing at the speed of trust. I really like what you shared. Very, very.
For sure. That's a rich phrase. Potentially he took it from someone else, but we've been using it for a while.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Nati. This was super helpful, and I hope that it's going to be useful for all the node starters in Enspiral. Let's see what's going to happen in the next couple of years. We might have this network of nodes all around. It's going to be fascinating. I'm looking forward to see.
Me too. I'm really looking forward. I feel like that's the next stage of Enspiral. It's what it feels really exciting now. It's like, there's some energy here and there's some aliveness here. And in Enspiral, we are experimenters of structures. So just having new things to play with is like, great, this is our playground. Yeah, I'm excited to see the handbook that you're going to make.
Yeah, me
Very
too.
great.
Let's see what's going to come out of this. It's also experimentation. I have all my cards all around.
Yeah, of course.
How does this fit? But it's all good. It's coming along great.